Many times we want some dramatic assignment from God, like put this great work in front of me. Stephen was just simply serving where there was a need. And then his opportunity comes. And eventually we know as we follow through the story of Stephen and we get into 7, it records for us what that opportunity was. He preaches before this hostile group of people one of the most beautiful sermons ever preached. And it costed everything. As those stones struck his body, he prayed, Lord, do not hold this against them. Hold this sin against them. Does that sound like anyone else we know? Maybe someone who hung on a cross for us. Do not hold this sin against them. They know not what they do. Now, I think, I can't predict the future, but I think most of us are probably not ever going to have to face a mob with stones in their hands for speaking out on behalf of Jesus. But we will face moments where standing up for Christ costs us something. Maybe that's going to be speaking up when others are silent. Maybe that's going to be speaking up or refusing to compromise. Maybe that comes at work or at school. Maybe that's going to be when we have to defend the truth, when it's often unpopular to do that. The question is not whether we can die like Stephen. The question is whether or not we can live like Stephen. Will we remain faithful when that faithfulness is going to cost us something? The first hero that we're looking at of the unexpected here teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear. It's faithfulness in the face of it. And holding your ground in that situation. Quick example that I just saw Friday night at the Giants game happened to be Pride Night. And they were wearing the hats that had the rainbow, their San Francisco logo had been turned into a rainbow flag. The pitcher comes out with that hat on, and there's writing on it, and we couldn't make out what it was. And so I went looking the next day. What did he have written on his hat? Turns out he had Genesis 6, 9 through 12 written on his hat, which is, as most of you probably know, the story of what the rainbow truly represents. It made Fox News. That's a bold step in a world that wants to cancel us for even thinking something different than what is the accepted situation. And there were other members in the bullpen that did the same thing, and another guy who just wore their regular hat. He wouldn't wear the pride hat. That could cost them something. But they were willing to stand up and do it anyway. Let's look at the next guy. Philip, willing to go anywhere. It's Acts chapter 8. Philip often gets overshadowed by Peter and Paul. But Philip teaches us one of the most important lessons in Acts, and I think that's availability. After the persecution has scattered the Christians there from Jerusalem, he travels to Samaria, and it says this: Therefore, those who had been scattered went about preaching the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and began proclaiming Christ to them. The crowds, with one accord, were giving attention to what was said by Philip as they heard and saw the signs which he was performing. So the gospel spread powerfully in that time period there. Lives were changed. And then in verse 8 it says, so there was much rejoicing in that city. Crowds were gathered and this great work was underway. And then God told Philip to leave. There's great things happening, but you got to go. That's 8:26 and 27. But the angel of the Lord spoke to Philip saying, get up and go to the south to the road that departs or descends from Jerusalem to Gaza. That is a desert road. So he got up and went. Imagine that. People are responding. The work is thriving. He's building all of this momentum. And God says, go to the desert road where there aren't people. And Philip obeyed. And there he met this one man, the Ethiopian official traveling home. And he has one conversation, one Bible study, one baptism, which results in one changed life. And that single encounter may have carried the gospel all out throughout Africa as he went back home. And so I think one of the greatest mistakes that we often make is assuming that effectiveness means we've got to have a crowd measured by numbers. Philip left all of that to teach one person. And we often think, if I'm not teaching a class, if I'm not preaching a sermon or leading a study at Panera or wherever it happens to be, I'm not being effective. But perhaps God put just that one person in your life. A coworker, a neighbor, a grandchild, a friend. Never underestimate what God can do through one conversation centered on Scripture. Because the kingdom advances one soul at a time these days. It's very rare to have the mass baptisms we read about in the pages of the New Testament. Philip teaches us that availability is often more important than our ability. I was there and I did what I could and said what I could. It's all that he asked of you. I really love this next guy we're going to talk about here, Barnabas. Power of encouragement. And what's interesting is that Barnabas is the nickname, as you all remember, and the apostles gave him that nickname. He didn't pick that for himself. And I think he's one of the most influential people in Acts, but he's rarely the center of attention. You all know his name means son of encouragement. What a reputation. Wouldn't it be excellent to be known as primarily as an encourager? Everybody around you is uplifted and built up. When Saul came to be a Christian, nobody trusted him. And of course, you can't really blame them. He'd been persecuting the Christians. Families were in fear of him. Congregations feared him. And yet Barnabas, he stepped forward. Barnabas believed in Saul before others did. Barnabas vouched for him, and he gave him an opportunity. That's what Acts 9:27 tells us. But Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the apostles and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road and that he had taken to him, and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. Humanly speaking, and like from our terms, there might not have been a missionary Paul without the encouragement of Barnabas if he hadn't stepped in and vouched for him. Now, if God wanted him to do that, he would have without Barnabas, but it looks very much like they were not going to accept him without Barnabas stepping in. He later does the same thing for John Mark, the young man who failed. And most of us remember the failure of John Mark. But Barnabas saw the potential. Every congregation has people that are carrying some invisible burden. Somebody here is discouraged. They feel inadequate. I wonder if they belong here. Somebody's struggling quietly. But what Barnabas teaches us is that encouragement is not secondary. It's not a secondary ministry. Encouragement is something that is very important to the work that is done. The work that this congregation should be trying to do. It's kingdom work, being an encourager. And so what does that look like for us? That's a text message, a phone call, a handwritten card, a kind word after worship, some note of appreciation. Or maybe it's doing something somehow that the person you do it for doesn't even know that you've done it. But they're encouraged by it anyway. Because those simple things can change lives. People are often brought to the gospel by acts like that. Wow, you were willing to take time out of your day to do this for me? And the church here grows stronger when encouragement becomes a part of what it is we're about, when it becomes a part of our culture. We're trying to lift one another up. Look at what it says about Barnabas in 11:23. He's just been sent to Antioch, and this is what he finds when he gets there. Then when he arrived and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them all with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. And then down to verse 24, let's see what happens as a result of that encouragement. It says, and considerable numbers were being brought to the Lord. His encouragement is bringing people to Christ. We can be that person. And so this morning, I want you to ask yourself, who needs a Barnabas this week? Look around and see who needs a Barnabas this week. And maybe you're that Barnabas. Moving on to Acts 16, we get our next unexpected person we want to look at here. It's Lydia. She's only mentioned in Acts 16. That's it. Let's read about that example in Acts 16:14. A woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple fabrics, a worshiper of God, was listening. And the Lord opened her heart to respond to the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. And then down in verse 40, it says, they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia when they saw the brethren, and they encouraged them and departed. That's it. That's all we get of Lydia, those two verses. Yet her impact is enormous. She was this seller of purple cloth, which means she was probably a very successful businesswoman there in Philippi. She's also the first recorded convert in Europe. That's what Acts tells us, that the Lord opened her heart. And after her conversion, she immediately puts her resources to work. She opened her home to these people who are working away from home. And she does it twice. The second time she does it is after they've been to prison. So she's opening her home to convicts who she just met. She provided hospitality. She created a place where Christians could gather, and the church of Philippi benefited from her willingness to use what it was that she had. And I think one of the reasons that we often don't get involved is that we focus on what we can't do. I can't teach. I can't preach. I can't lead singing. I can't do what so-and-so does. Lydia teaches us a different lesson. Start with what God has already given you. She had a home, she used it. And so ask yourself, what resources are at my disposal? What are the opportunities that I have in front of me? What doors might God have already opened? Because God's not going to ask us to use something that we don't have. He asks us to use what it is that we have. And some people have homes like Lydia. Some people have time. Some people have experience. Some have financial resources or wisdom. Some are really good at hospitality. And so the question should never be what it is, what do I lack? I can't do this because I lack things. The question should be, what has God placed in my hands? And how can I use it to best serve Him? And then we come to this guy who almost, again, nobody really thinks about him. Nobody really remembers him. Ananias in Acts 9. Kind of the perfect example of the unexpected hero, because most Christians know Saul. But we often overlook Ananias. Yet without Ananias, the story, it feels incomplete. God told him to go to visit Saul. Imagine hearing that command. Saul, who imprisoned Christians. Saul, who terrified believers. Saul, who became synonymous with persecution. Verse 1 of the chapter here says, still breathing threats. That's who Paul was. Still breathing threats. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he did to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priests to bind all who call on your name. Ananias understandably hesitated. Yet he obeyed. And what strikes me is the words that we get in verse 17. His first words to Paul, or Saul, brother Saul. Not persecutor of the church Saul, not dangerous Saul, not enemy Saul, brother Saul. And I think this could be one of the most difficult applications of this lesson, because I think if you're like me, there may be someone that you've written off. Someone you believe will never change. Someone whose past is too ugly. They could never change and become a Christian. Ananias is teaching us that God's future for a person can be much greater than their past. The church has got to be careful not to define people by who they were before Christ, or who they are before Christ. And we as individuals need to do that same thing. Thank God someone gave you a chance, and me a chance. Someone saw potential in me. They believed that the gospel could change me. Jez often says she wishes she met me in high school, and I said, no, you don't. You wouldn't have liked me. And I think erroneously to myself that she would not have been able to reach me, but that's not accepting the power that is in the gospel for salvation. Do we do that same thing? The gospel can never change them. I sure hope not. Let's move on to the next two in the group here. Aquila and Priscilla working as a team. Service as a team. Acts 18, where we get Aquila and Priscilla, and they appear repeatedly throughout the New Testament, but they're never the main characters. Yet they consistently appear, and they're doing good things, and good things are happening around them. They welcome Paul. They work alongside Paul. They open their home too. They taught Apollos so that he would have a better understanding, and they were strengthening the churches. And so in them, we see this remarkable influence they had without ever being the main story. They just pop up again here and there. We see little glimpses of their lives and how they were effective with small things. And we live in this culture that celebrates visibility, don't we? If you're on social media, every third message that comes through is some ad offering you to have 3 million followers by lunchtime. But the New Testament celebrates faithfulness, not famousness. Some of the most important work in the kingdom happens when nobody is seeing it. It's meals shared, it's guests welcomed, prayers offered for people. Just conversations had with one another, with those outside. Trying to pull along young Christians and encourage them. Bible studies that are conducted around our kitchen table or some table in some restaurant somewhere. Because I think the kingdom is often built in a living room long before it's built in an auditorium like this. Aquila and Priscilla remind us that influence isn't measured by attention. It's measured by our impact, which means we have to talk to people to have impact. We have to be in people's lives. In small ways, in big ways, in whatever ways you can. So what is it that all of these heroes have in common? Stephen, Philip, Barnabas, Lydia, Ananias, Aquila, and Priscilla. They're different personalities, different abilities, different backgrounds. Yet they all share some very important traits. They were available. God can't steer a parked car. We have to be willing. Each one of them was willing. Each one of them was available. And each one of them responded when the opportunity came. We need to be like that. They served where they were. None began with some extraordinary excitement. They just simply served where they stood. They put the kingdom first. Their lives were not centered around or focused on their own personal achievement. It was the mission that mattered most. How can we reach people? How can we get this message that we've just received to as many people as we can? They trusted God with the results. Because none of them knew how significant their actions would become. They just simply obeyed and let God handle the outcome. And so I think this is encouraging because most of us don't realize what the impact of our faithfulness will have. We don't always see it. Stephen didn't know that his death would influence generations of people. Philip didn't know where the influence of that Ethiopian official would spread to. Barnabas never knew how many people Paul would reach. Ananias was unaware that Saul would become the Apostle Paul and do all of the great things he did, at least at the moment that he went to him. Faithfulness rarely comes with advanced knowledge of the results. God just simply asks us to obey. And so I want to tell you one more story to close, because it affected me rather deeply. I visited with someone this week who's in the hospital. He's in great pain continually. His room is uncomfortable. He's sharing it with multiple other people who are noisy. He's not getting any sleep because of that. They're overworked. Not a word of complaint about any of those things. He was concerned for the staff. I don't want to be a burden to them because they've got so much going on. He was concerned for his family, his wife, and his grandchildren. And he was concerned for each and every one of you. That's what our conversation was about. That's an unexpected hero. Someone concerned about the mission of saving souls. And I walked away from that a little bit ashamed of myself for the way I sometimes behave. But that's the people we're asked to be. People doing the small things, concerned for one another's salvation. And of course, the greatest example of that kind of care and love for one another is Jesus. The fact that he was willing to go to the cross on our behalf so that we can come and be forgiven and then become all of these things for other people.